Okay, folks, welcome back to the show. Thanks for starting the beginning of your day with us here, the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. I don't know if you guys caught Tucker Carlson last week. He had a guy by the name of Dr. Wayne Johnson on the program. Now, Dr. Johnson is wanting to be appointed as the next senator for Georgia because you've got, I think, Senator Isaacson is he's not going to continue in that office anymore because of health problems. And Dr. Wayne Johnson joins us now on the phone. Dr. Johnson, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, Paul. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Now, I want to talk about your candidacy for the U.S. Senate in Georgia here in just a minute. But I caught that segment on Tucker Carlson, and let me just tell you, I think your ideas are really unique, and this student loan crisis is something that we definitely need to discuss. Now, I want to remind our listeners that from 2017 to 2019. You were a senior official in President Trump's administration. He's serving as the Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer and Chief Operating Officer for the Department of Education's Office of Federal Student Aid. So you have a unique perspective. What needs to change about the federal student loan program?
Well, the basic thing that needs to change is the federal government needs to stop making loans for people to go to school. The program has gotten unbelievably out of hand. Over the past 10 years, we've added well over $1 trillion to the amount of debt burden that's on people's backs, and it's because the loan program that the federal government has in place makes it extraordinarily easy for schools to convince students to take down high levels of debt burden in order to go to school there. So we got to stop making loans, but if we're going to stop making loans, we do need to put forth some type of a grant program that will allow people to at least get through an undergraduate degree. But that's the answer: is stop making the loans.
Stop making the loans. So the incentive structure is all it's reversed, right? I mean, these schools, these colleges, universities, they have no incentive to control their costs because they have what is essentially the government guaranteeing customers for them, right?
It's exactly correct, and Tucker Carlson picked that up in some of his earlier segments. He had pointed to that. I think what I helped him to appreciate was a little bit of, I added some clarity in terms of exactly how the mechanics are working. But the federal government will make loans to people up to an unlimited level based upon what a college says is their cost to attend. So there's no control or constraint on the colleges and universities to keep them from continuing to raise their prices because they know that there's an ever-ending flow of money coming from the government in that regard.
So I've got this. I've got an op-ed that I found. Again, we're talking with Dr. Wayne Johnson. He's a candidate for U.S. Senate out of Georgia. Paragraph 2, the solution to relieving the personal financial burden of student loan debt is for the United States Congress to enact law that would fully cancel federal student loan debt. Moreover, to be equitable, people who did pay their student loan debt should be given credit for having done so. And there would be also a path forward so that post-high school education, whether vocational or traditional college, can be pursued on a basis that is debt-free. So I read that, and I wanted to just ask, so is your idea free second or higher education? Is that what you think needs to happen?
Well, first of all, I'm a Republican, and people keep asking me why is a Republican setting forth such a bold, comprehensive and I like to think decisive plan. And the answer is because we do have a social good that we've got to put in place in order to help people get through a certain level of post-high school education. And so when I started thinking this thing through, and again, 2.5 years front and center working at the Department of Ed, getting a doctorate in the subject before, and 35 years in consumer finance, mostly in the credit card space, I think I have a unique perspective on the responsibilities associated with, debt incurrence. But the specifics of what I'm advocating, and it is I'm a very physically conservative approach, but the first part of it is going forward, there needs to be a certain amount of money that's allocated to somebody to attend post-high school education, and that can be job and skills training as well as academic pursuit. But that needs to have a defined limit. It needs to be, this is as much we're going to make available and no more. And that's basically contrasting against today's current environment of, ever increasing amount of unlimited funding. With regard to, once you make that decision of what's a go forward amount, then you come back into and look at your current file. And our current file has 44 million customers, 37 million of which have student loan debt of less than $50,000. So if you're going to give $50,000 going forward, which is what my plan advocates for, then you do $50,000 worth of relief of people on the books, and that'll take care of 37 million people, and a large number of people from state of Arkansas. And in the case of Georgia, it would relieve the debt on 1.7 million people, about $53 billion. So we're talking about serious money here. But then you got to really take a look at the 2/3 of the people that never pursued any type of education post-high school, and they should have the ability to tap into that, and I'm looking at a 10-year look back on that process. And then you got people that paid for it themselves. And, a lot of folks say, well, the socialistic aspect of relieving all this debt and going forward, what about me? I paid for it on my own. And quite frankly, those folks need to be given tax credits equal to an amount up to $50,000. So the equity for everybody is basically one of the cornerstones and driving elements of my plan.
So do you see this plan as correcting a problem that the government has really caused here? I mean, I know people voluntarily, when you're 18 years old, okay, you're going into debt. But at 18 years old, you're just ready to get to college. You're not really thinking 4 years ahead. And again, that's still your personal responsibility, a lot of people would say. But has the government caused this problem?
The answer is absolutely. The institutions of trust, the universities and the government, two major institutions that the people are taught to trust, have breached that trust. And, whether it's an 18 or 20-year-old or even a 40 or 45-year-old racking up to the school and saying, hey, I'd like to advance myself, the way in which the system presents itself is, hey, this is the way it's customarily done. This is, quote, even a best practice, which is something that sends a chill down my spine, that's being advanced to the student. You're going to get whatever, the state's going to give you or whatever the school's going to give you. But mostly the schools, what they're giving up for the most part is false discounting. And then, oh, by the way, here's an award letter, and baked into this award letter is this financial aid coming from the federal government. And they fail to tell you that aid actually is manifested by some very unorthodox loan instruments. And then they say, oh, by the way, don't sweat it, because at the end of the day, you're going to be caught up in you're going to be able to pay for it through an income-based repayment plan. And then they forgot to tell you that, oh, by the way, that's going to create negative amortization. And so the $20,000 you take down is actually going to wind up, after forbearances and deferments and all these other really bizarre schemes that are in place by the government, is going to grow to $120,000 or $150,000. So yes, the government, what started off with good intentions, which is a straightforward loan program that somebody would pay off after 10 years, that would have a fixed amount of loan money available, with a couple of twists and turns under the previous administration, basically boiled down to this very convoluted set of 30 different repayment plans. And I've got a doctorate in the subject. Believe me, it's hard for me to understand this stuff. And at the end of the day, the students are basically, saying, well, this is the school, I trust them. The government, I trust them, or they wouldn't make this thing available to me. And consequently, they wake up and say, wait a minute, how did I get ambushed along the way to this higher ed pursuit? And it really becomes problematic for people that start but never finish.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? It definitely does. I've heard about that phenomenon many, many times. So if the government caused the problem, I can definitely see how we would say that there's a lot of people out there who are victims of this.
Well, victims is, that's a term that has some legal connotations. But
Right.
but let me say this: the government caused the problem, and the government was certainly highly complicit in the problem. And it's, there's been some. There was an author that wrote a book called Indebtedness, which I found pretty profound, because what she basically said was that there's a student debt complex that's a combination of the government doing its activities, and the schools doing their activities, and then of course you've got people that feed around the fringes of this, which can be very servicing organizations. So there's a whole complex at play to perpetuate this, and an astounding number is 80% of all the cash going into the higher education system in the United States is coming from the federal government. And so when you got that much, of the economic driver coming from one source, you got what you got. But the bottom line is this will only get fixed. We were endeavoring to fix it operationally. Tremendous strides forward. Secretary DeVos, fully supportive of that. President's administration, fully supportive of that. Amazing things. But I woke up and said, what we're doing is just making this machine that's causing these problems run much more efficiently. And what we got to do is we got to, basically turn to Congress. And in my opinion, the Senate's where this has got to be driven from in order to make these changes that are necessary to the law.
We're talking with Dr. Wayne Johnson. He's a candidate for U.S. Senate out of Georgia. Now, can you tell me a little bit about the political process here? Right, I understand. I did a little research. You're wanting the governor of Georgia, Governor Kemp, there to appoint you to this Senate vacancy at this point, right?
Yeah, Governor Kemp actually put forth a very transparent application process where he allowed for people that are not normally out of the political realm to set themselves forward as someone that he could appoint to replace Johnny Isakson at the end of the year. He's got over 500 applicants for that. He's now in his decision process of appointment. Presented myself. Hopefully, he'll decide that I'm the right person to go into the Senate so that I could hit the ground running in January and start making these changes that would be good for the state of Georgia. But in order to make them good for the state of Georgia, you got to actually make them good for the entire country.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, I want to tell everybody about your website. Your website, if you want to check this out, folks, is johnsonsenate.com. That's johnsonsenate.com, and you can find out more. You can also see his interview there from Tucker Carlson. The last thing I want to talk about, and I know this is kind of backtracking a little bit, sir, but in this op-ed, I also see that when the student takes this money and goes into debt, this is also affecting their credit score, isn't it? So it's going to make it harder for them to buy a house or to get a car or something like that, right?
Well, it does, and it actually manifests in two ways. Even if somebody is performing as agreed, and one of the other interesting pieces of information is only 25% of the people are actually paying down interest and principal each month. So even if you make your payment, your outstanding loan balance is growing. So what's interesting is on your credit bureau report, your loan balance would be continuing to show that it's growing month over month, which when you do go through all this, the credit scoring calculations, that flags up some stuff. But then also a large number of people miss their initial payments because they just did not know they owed the money. I mean, that situation where they show up and sign a 10-year master promissory note without having any understanding of the amounts of money owing or the interest rates, people either don't complete school or they do complete school, but they actually do not know how much money they owe or where to make a payment. So that starts showing up as missed payments. And so while the accuracy of the fact that the payment was missed is going into the report, the fact that the people didn't even know they owed the money is an unfair element of reporting. Mm-hmm. So people's credit reports are getting severely impaired because of the federal student loan reporting of credit bureau information.
So, and for real this time, this is my last question. What happens if we do nothing? what is there a crisis and is this bubble going to pop? What happens?
Well, what's interesting is this is not a bubble that will ever pop because the way it's funded, the government borrows money through the Treasury. They put the money out. The money flows, into the schools, and then individuals are taking on, their fractional piecemeal of the indebtedness obligation, and then so instead of it being a big bang, like the financial meltdown was, with regard to the mortgage crisis, this will be lots of lots of very significant issues that relates to individual families. And so this is one of those situations. It's in my opinion, it's an abomination that's there. Everybody's aware of it, but because there's not a big bang associated with it, and a quote gigantic resolution effort, it'll just continue to erode the fabric of America. So if we don't do anything, just more and more people are going to get into more and more debt. The schools will continue to raise prices because they have no check on it, and we'll be talking about this a few years from now. Instead of being 1.6 trillion, it'll be 3 trillion, and I can even see the day when it'll be 5 trillion.
Wow.
And so what's happening is the reality is that people are not getting married because they don't want to take on each other's indebtedness obligation. People are, if they're not, they're also not having children. They're not buying homes. We could just go on and on in terms of what would continue to erode, and it's a level of basically student loan debt depression, not too dissimilar to what happened earlier in our century. But the net of it is we have this opportunity at this point in time to make a decisive course correction where we can say, yes, higher education or post-high school education is important. We're going to make an allocation towards that. We're going to reform the finance system. And, oh, by the way, to make things right, because the government did create this problem. When the government does things right, they get it really right. When the government does things wrong, they can get it really wrong because of the scale that we're dealing with. One of the interesting things, if you look at the macroeconomic effects of student loan debt cancellation, and there's a couple of reports out there. One was put out by the Levi Institute, and it's entitled "The Macroeconomic Effects of Student Loan Debt Cancellation." It's incredibly powerful what those economic models show in terms of the positive effect on the economy, household formation, and what have you. So I would look at this solution to this problem also being a great stepping stone to a very significant economic stimulation.
It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating that the student loan program, what I just kind of heard you say there, the student loan program in some cases is actually hurting the American family, the idea of having kids and that sort of thing. And that would be the complete opposite of what it was claiming to do originally. You know what I mean? Which is to help
Exactly.
you. Yeah, that's incredible. Dr. Wayne Johnson, good luck to you, sir. I appreciate your big ideas, and I really appreciate you spending time with us this morning and educating my audience.
Well, I appreciate you. I've had an opportunity since y'all contacted me to go back and look at a lot of y'all's segments. Y'all do some really important, powerful things. So it was an honor to be on your program.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Love to do it again sometime. Have a happy Thanksgiving.